and we are going to call upon Professor Moniuz Soya, Soya, from the Hebrew and Aramaic Studies Department at Salamanca University, and he'll talk about the Jewish corresponding members of the Royal Spanish Academy, a historical overview. The floor is yours.
מכובדיי, אורחים נכבדים, עמיתים יקרים, גבירותיי ורבותיי, שלום. The occasion that brings us together here today can only give us cause for celebration and joy. We, colleagues and friends of Professor Moshe Oorfali, are most pleased to have the opportunity to pay him a much deserved tribute on the occasion of his retirement, a stage of full maturity, and at the same time continuous renewal and widening horizons. And indeed, the combination of an impeccable cursus honorum that accredits him as a distinguished professor of this Israeli university, as a renowned international specialist in the intellectual and religious history of the Spanish medieval Jews and their Sephardic diaspora. I was honored to speak here as Shaliach Tzibur for all of us. Since the 1980s, for more than 40 years now, Professor Oorfali has contributed with his research to the knowledge of a fundamental aspect that structured the life and the rules of existence of the medieval Jewish communities established both in Sefard and in the later Western Mediterranean and Atlantic diasporas. His academic activity includes a knowledgeable analysis, rich discussion, and expert revision of Latin, Hebrew, Castilian, and Portuguese sources on the theological dispute between Jews and Christians that is the great split in Western history, which, while rooted in the origins of Judaism and Christianity, would get to unfold with an infinite number of nuances in a vast literature of a learned and sometimes of popular nature under the well-known journal of Adversus Judaeus. In this way, Professor Oorfali took the research of Iberian Jewish history to new sophisticated venues far beyond his teachers, but honoring them as well. However, rather than dissecting the manifold contributions of his curriculum, I would like to emphasize the innovative character that his research has brought to this field. And I would like to do so by analyzing both the main lines of continuity and specific developments that ensued from the Talmudic period to medieval and modern times through homiletic and responsa narratives. As Moshe Oorfali has shown us, these arguments and disputes rooted in a secular confrontation, many of them led by Jews and conversos that range from Rashi, Maimonides, Nachmanides, Rashbash, Rabbi Haim ben Musa, to Jerónimo de Santa Fe, Manuel Aboab, or Isaac Aboab de Fonseca, constitute as a whole small example of the specific and differentiating character of the Sephardic within the history of the Jewish people. Both his remarkable intellectual trajectory and his ability to serve as a bridge to strengthen the Spanish-Israeli academic links earned Professor Oorfali his appointment as a foreign corresponding member of the Royal Academy of History in Madrid in December of the year 2005, after his three predecessors, first Abraham Shalom Yehuda in 1914, then Yitzhak Fritz Beer in 1967, and Chaim Beiner in 1975. 10 years later, in November 2015, he was also appointed, together with other colleagues who honor us with his presence today, as well as foreign corresponding members of the Royal Spanish Academy, in a fruitful effort to initiate what today is already a tangible reality, namely the National Academy of Judeo-Spanish or Ladino in Israel. It seems therefore only fair to briefly look back and bring to your attention a hitherto virtually unknown chapter related to the history of the Royal Academies in Spain, and in particular to the Royal Spanish Academy and its corresponding members of Jewish origin. It should be remembered, first of all, that the Royal Academies were created in Spain in an apparently contradictory context. On the one hand, they were consistent with the Enlightenment spirit of the 18th century, which aimed to make these institutions centers of research and of cultural, scientific, and artistic dissemination independent of the university environment. But on the other hand, they did not see these function as effective tools for state centralization, since they were protected by the Crown, under whose patronage the 12 Royal Academies that since today were founded. All of them are part of a layer corporate institution known as the Instituto de España, of which the Royal Spanish Academy is the most prestigious and the oldest, having been founded in 1713 in imitation of the Académie Française on the initiative of the Ilustrado Juan Manuel Pacheco and with the royal sanction of King Philip V. We must simultaneously acknowledge the fact that since its inception, the interest of the Royal Spanish Academy in Sephardic language and culture had been quite limited, practically non-existent. From 1849, the year in which the Academy formalized its functions and the procedure for appointing corresponding members, national and international, until the beginning of the 20th century, there was not a single scholar of Jewish origin, either Sephardic or Ashkenazic, in the corporation. This is highly surprising, since the foreign corresponding members were not chosen on the basis of their religious status or cultural affiliation, but because of the need for these leading intellectuals in the field of Spanish language and literature to be able to report on the variance of Spanish from their places of residence. The fact is that within the field of the Spanish use, Judeo Spanish or Ladino was in those last decades in the 19th century a completely unknown reality. This situation began to change at the beginning of the 20th century, thanks to the confluence of several circumstances. Firstly, the impulse of the Philosophardic campaign initiated by the Senator and Dr. Ángel Pulido, as Professor Alisa Mello has studied. Secondly, the interest that Ramón Menéndez Pidal, director of the Royal Spanish Academy, began to show towards the Sephardic Romance language. And finally, by the presence and activity of the Orientalist Abraham Yehuda, the first professor of rabbinic language and literature at the Sorbonne University of Madrid since 1913. It is worth recalling the historical context and the origin of the initiative. In 1904, the Spanish senator Ángel Pulido Fernández, of liberal ideology and part of the political movement known as Regeneracionismo, launched a campaign in favor of promoting relations between the Sephardi and Spain. The initiative was launched with a memorable speech by Pulido in the Senate of November 1903, followed by a press campaign and the publication of two books, Los Israelitas Españoles y Idioma Castellano, 1904, and Españoles sin Patria y la Raza Sefardí, 1905. Although the practical consequences of the campaign were rather limited, it had a certain impact on the public opinion and succeeded in making some Spanish politicians and intellectuals aware of the existence of the Sephardic and of the Judeo-Spanish language, mostly in the Ottoman territories. In his 1904 book, Pulido includes a list of 14 Sephardic intellectuals and professionals from different places whom he proposed that the Royal Spanish Academy should appoint as foreign corresponding members. And Pulido argued, and I quote, "Does the Royal Academy of the Language not believe that with them an exchange of ideas, writings, and important correspondence can be opened? And would the eminent corporation lose something by appointing them as corresponding members and committed them to the patriotic task of regenerating their language by writing grammars and books to that effect, in close quotation marks, many of Angel's Pulido's demands to the Royal Spanish Academy were well received, to the extent that his proposals were recorded in the Academy Books of Minutes of 28 April 1904 in terms that agreed for the first time, and I quote, to establish relations with the Jewish communities of the East, going so far as to associate with our work as correspondents those who, because of their representation and culture, may deserve it, and to send them the works of this corporation that are most suitable for preserving among them the purity of our language. Close quotation marks. Thus, we can affirm that at the beginning of the 20th century, the conjunction of Pulido's proposal and of Menendez Pidal's presence in the Royal Spanish Academy led to the appointment of the first Sephardic origin corresponding members. They did not include all of those that Pulido had suggested, but at least Jaime Enrique Bejarano and Abraham Danon, both in 1904, and José Benoliel in 1907, were appointed. Bejarano was appointed corresponding member for Bucharest, Romania, Abraham Danon for Adrianople, present-day Edirne in the former Ottoman Empire, and José Benoliel, who was born in Tangier, for Lisbon, Portugal. From my point of view, this first stage of the linguistic policy of the Royal Spanish Academy towards the Mediterranean East and North Moroccan Sephardic world was determined by the favorable impact that philosophism had on a remarkable number of intellectuals and politicians of the time, such as Miguel de Unamuno, Menendez Pidal, and Antonio Maura. It may also be connected to the desire to broaden Spanish influence in Morocco, which was under heavy French influence, soon to be conquered by it in 1912. These appointments were the most celebrated by the elected corresponding members. Thus, all three, Bejarano, Danon, and Benoliel, sent letters of gratitude to the Academy, expressing their willingness to collaborate with it. Bejarano tried unsuccessfully to get the Academy to publish his Refanero Glosado. Abraham Danon sent numerous offprints of his research to the Academy Library, and José Benoliel continued gathering all versions of Sephardic Romance in Morocco in collaboration with Menendez Pidal, publishing in 1926 one of the best studies of Judo-Spanish of Morocco, Zetipia, in the academic quality. The second most important milestone in our brief history account takes us to the 1920s and 1930s. At that time, although Pulido's exaltation of Sephardic philosophism has been left behind, Sephardism regained some of its prominence through the works and research carried out by Americo Castro, Jiménez Caballero, and Máximo Osricano. However, within the sphere of the Spanish Academy, the appointment of new foreign correspondence members was oriented towards personality of Ashkenazi origin. This is something of no small significance, of which very few details were known until now. These appointments were internationally supported thanks to the influence of Abraham Dauda. His friendship with the Spanish ambassador in London, Ramón Pérez de Ayala, paved the way for a prompt and effective appointment by the Academy. And with the approval of its directors, Menendez Pidal and Antonio Maura, two new Jewish names were then added to the list of foreign correspondents, namely Israel Golanz and Chaim Nachman Bialik. As for the first, Israel Golanz, as advanced scholar, founder of the British Academy and promoter of the Cervantes Chair at King's College, London, he was appointed foreign correspondent member for London in June 1919. The Spanish Royal Academy highlighted Golan's knowledge of linguistics and humanities, especially as an essential figure in the development of Spanish-British cultural relations, as much as his exceptional knowledge of Shakespeare biography and works. The second corresponding member, the Ukrainian-born Tel Aviv-based famous national poet Chaim Nachman Bialik, was appointed in March 1932. Bialik, who had had close epistolary relationship with Abraham Yehuda, was considered by the Royal Academy to be, and of course, a great aficionado of Spanish literature, giving him such merit with his painstaking translation into Hebrew of Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote de la Mancha. Both the appointments of Golanz and Bialik, officially sponsored by Francisco Rodriguez Marin and Menendez Pidal and suggested and enhanced by Abraham Yehuda, can be understood as an attempt by the Academy to encourage a linguistic policy of exaltation of the Spanish language beyond its national borders. Don Quixote thus became, both in its British projection and in its Hebrew translation, the highest expression of Spanish culture. On the other hand, Bialik's appointment should also be interpreted as a specific achievement of Abraham Yehuda in his attempt to legitimize a project of a Jewish national home that was being developed in Eretz Israel. That a foreign institution such as the Royal Spanish Academy should acknowledge his work as a poet and translator had a notable impact in the international press. The third and last stage of this history for individual appointments took place in the 1960s. By then, given the development and steady progress of the State of Israel, attempts at Spanish-Israeli cultural rapprochement were becoming increasingly necessary. And Judeo-Spanish, as a result of the declarations brotherhood made at the second conference of the Association of Spanish Language Academies held in Madrid in 1956, was to become an exceptional linguistic evidence of a shared historical past. By that time, Judeo-Spanish had reached a status that made it worthy of study in all its grammatical dimensions as a biarity of Spanish to whose Spanish trunk it had to be restored, rather than a mere linguistic byproduct of archaism of residual character, as it had traditionally been considered by its sound users and researchers. In this favorable context, although strongly biased by the capricious policy of national Catholicism towards the Jewish question, the appointment of the last two corresponding foreign members of Sephardic origin can be understood. Undoubtedly, the appointment as a corresponding member of Israel Salvatore Reva in January 1964, sponsored by the renowned scholars José María Pemán, Julio Casares, and Juan Ignacio Lucaretena, was a fair recognition of the linguistic and literary research work promoted by the School of French Hispanists headed by Marcel Bataillon. Reva, of Salonican origin and a native speaker of Judeo-Spanish, was, without a doubt, the corresponding scholar with the highest competence, both linguistically and culturally, to represent the Sephardic domain in the Royal Academy. His linguistic contributions to the history of Judeo-Spanish were very notable, and they fully cohered with the new methodological approaches with which the phonetics and lexicography of Roman language were approached. Suffice to say that in addition to this later evolution towards the study of the conversion literature, a field in full bloom as a result of his polemic with Americo Castro, makes him a figure of exceptional relevance in the history of Jewish Hispanism. 5 years later, in the midst of the effervescence of the rehabilitation of the Jewish community of Madrid, and as a consequence of the inauguration of its new synagogue and the opening of the Sephardic Museum of Toledo, the Sephardic of Salonican origin, Yitzhak Rafael Molcho, was recognized as a new foreign corresponding member of the Academy. In January 1969, Rafael Molcho received the communication of his appointment, to which he gratefully responded with a heartfelt letter in Judeo-Spanish. Muy querido don Rafael Lapesa, habiendo estado un poco enfermo estos días, es con alegría que acuso recibo de su carta del 24 de enero de 1969, dándome la noticia oficial unánimemente escogido por la tan alta corporación como miembro correspondiente extranjero, reciban todos los miembros con el señor director, don Alonso Damaso, y ustedes mis sinceros agradecimientos. Procuraré, si Dios me da vidas y fuerza, de ser útil a la academia y estoy naturalmente a vuestra entera disposición. Con un fuerte abrazo de corazón, Isaac Rafael Mojo. The importance of Mojo as a promoter at the head of Spanish-Israeli relations in the 1960s cannot be overstated. Through the journal he edited, the Tesoro de los Judíos Sefardíes, Ochal de Eudei Sfarad, Ejeter Toldot de Eudei Sfarad Metaputam, Mojo was able to bring to Spanish culture and his colleagues much of his research on the Sephardic community of Salonika and its balance, as well as numerous other contributions, both on the Zionist movement and on the life and work of Rabbi Moshe Amos Nino, and in the form of his portraits, various Jewish intellectuals linked to the funding of the state, apart from publishing many documents on the Sephardic past. Mojo was not a philologist of a strict academic training in the style of Weber, but a profound connoisseur of Sephardic culture, and above all, an excellent communicator with important academics and diplomatics contact in the Spanish sphere. In his numerous visits to Madrid, he not only gained the recognition of the school of Spanish Hebraists, represented by Francisco Cantera Burgos and José Millas Vallicrosa, José María, but also that of Menéndez Pidal, whose friendship was forged in 1961 following the public lecture he gave in Pidal's house on the influence of modern Hebrew literature and its relationship with the classical literature of Spain. After that, various institutional meetings took place, which strengthened Spanish-Israeli cultural contacts, culminating in Pidal's visit to Israel in March 1964. His appointment as a corresponding member, in short, favored the consolidation of these relations that, as we have seen, had been taking shape since the beginning of the 20th century within the Royal Academy. Let me conclude now by saying that recalling all these events as a pretext for paying tribute to Professor Moshe Orfali is the most pleasant task for the historian and for all Spanish Hebraists who at some point in their scientific itinerary have had the good fortune and the privilege to enjoy the kindness, disposition, and very fine work of Professor Orfali. In Spain, all departments of Hebrew studies openly recognized the decisive impulse given by Professor Orfali to improve and to deepen the knowledge of our common past, so closely linked to the history and vicissitudes of Iberian Jewish and conversion communities. Together with our heartfelt gratitude for his labor of love, we, speakers and organizers of this event, can only wish him the most happy and fruitful retirement. Congratulations.